Leonie Martin was born on June 3, 1863. Blonde and blue-eyed, she was different from her dark-haired sisters. Sickly right from the start, she developed whooping cough, which worried her mother Zélie very much. Later, when she was 11 months old, she got the measles, which brought on complications of convulsions. When Leonie was 9 months old, Zélie writes, "Leonie isn't growing properly. She doesn't seem to want to walk. She doesn't bear any weight on her legs at all. There is nothing wrong with her, but she's very weak and very small. She has just had the measles. She had them very badly with terrible convulsions." At that time, doctors knew nothing about the complications that can come with measles. Unknown to them, Leonie's convulsions were brought on by encephalitis, a swelling of the brain, which can cause deafness or developmental disabilities. For Leonie, she would be spared deafness, but she would have the disabilities, which caused emotional outbursts, a slow ability to learn and process information. As a result of the encephalitis, which was deadly back in those days, Leonie nearly died. Her father, Louis Martin, went on a pilgrimage on foot to the shrine of Our Lady of Seas to pray for his youngest daughter's health. In desperation, Zélie wrote to her brother, who was a pharmacist, "Please give me your opinion and tell me what I should do. Perhaps you know of a famous specialist who could prescribe an effective remedy. You can't imagine how much it hurts me to see my poor little girl in this state. I have just written to our sister Elise, asking her to say a novena for her." This novena would be what would save Leonie's life, as no medicines or special remedies could help her. Zélie's sister, Elise, who had entered the convent only a few years prior, took the name Sister Marie Dosathy. In response to Zélie's plea, she prayed a novena to St. Margaret Mary, who was only beatified then. Their prayers were answered, and Leonie's health made a dramatic turnaround. Zélie proudly wrote to her brother months later, "Leonie is a darling and fairly strong. One thing is certain, she has never been sick since Elise said the novena to the Blessed Margaret Mary. Before the novena, she was hardly able to stand or move about, but after the novena, she's been running around like a little rabbit." Although her family loved her very much, they didn't understand her. They didn't know how to handle her emotional outbursts or rebellious nature. You may be surprised to hear how she is described by family members, who wrote their frustrations and worry without restraint, but always with love. Zélie writes to her sister-in-law, "My children often ask about your little Jean and ask if she will come back soon. We have had a hard time explaining to Leonie that Jean is a little girl, not a boy. She is slow to understand things, but then she has been ill so often. I hope she will develop in time." A few months later, Zélie's worries continue. "Now Leonie has sore eyes. The poor child worries me. She has a very undisciplined nature, and mentally she is underdeveloped." In 1870, as Leonie approached school age, Zélie hoped to send her to the Visitation boarding school in Le Mans, but worried that she wouldn't be accepted due to her slowness and emotional needs. She was right. She was advised to wait a year before sending Leonie to them. A year later, Leonie joined her sisters at the boarding school, and she was delighted to be included. But a few months later, again, Leonie was dismissed on the grounds of, "She is not ready to keep up with the others, and there is no teacher available to give her private lessons." Her aunt, who was one of the nuns at the Visitation Convent, and who had prayed for Leonie's health when she was a baby, helped to oversee Leonie's behavior and education. She wrote to Zélie in a letter with exasperated affection, "At the moment I am taking care of Leonie. That terrible little girl, she certainly keeps me on my toes. It is a continual battle." Again, a year later, they tried to send Leonie to the Visitation boarding school. Leonie very much wanted to go and promised to be very good. Zélie writes to her sister-in-law an update on the family. "Only Leonie won't settle down. She's like a child of 8. She will be going to the Visitation school in October unless her aunt wants me to keep her at home for another year." Again, Leonie was denied, so Zélie arranged for a tutor to come to the house. Leonie struggled in math, and it's said that she did interesting things with her sums. Later that same year, Zélie received word that Leonie could try again at the boarding school. Zélie told her brother, I'm getting Leonie's clothes ready. I think it is money wasted, but it is, above all, the trouble that she gives her aunt that worries me. Nevertheless, it is my duty to try again. If she doesn't succeed, at least I will have done all I can. Scolding was the only way that everyone knew how to deal with Leonie. They scolded her at home and they scolded her at school. But then one day, her aunt was inspired to try loving and patient corrections instead. She tells Zelly, "You asked me for news of Leonie. As you know, the poor child has plenty of faults. During her first month here, I scolded her whenever she didn't do well, which meant that I was scolding her all the time. I could see that I was making her unhappy, and I didn't want to do that. I wanted to be God's providence to her. So I stopped scolding and started to be very gentle with her, telling her that I saw that she wanted to be good and make me happy, and that I had faith in her." Instantly, they saw a change in Leonie's behavior. She worked hard on obedience and told her aunt her faults promptly. Unfortunately, this didn't last, and Leonie was sent home from school a third time. She continued to be disruptive at school and was unable to handle herself around children, causing the teachers to separate Leonie and isolate her. Zelly was beside herself with frustration and sorrow. However, she continued to have hope. "The more difficult she becomes, the more convinced I am the good Lord will not leave her like this. When she was only 18 months old, Leonie was cured of an illness that should have killed her. Why did God save her if He did not intend to be merciful to her?" Leonie too understood that she was different from her sisters. In fact, she often worried that she had been switched at birth. Zelly put her fears to rest, telling her that Leonie had been born at home. Despite these problems, Leonie had good intentions. In fact, she talked constantly of becoming a Poor Clare. Zelly, no doubt, wanted to be supportive, but couldn't help being skeptical based on what she had been through with Leonie over the years. She keeps telling us that she is going to be a Poor Clare. I have as much faith in that as I would if little Therese, who is 2, said it. But she is determined to overcome her faults. This stubbornness or determination is what caused Leonie to have so many difficulties as a child, but in the end, it would help her become a saint. Again, Zelly writes of her bewilderment to her sister-in-law. "She has a will of iron. When she wants something, she will fight her way past any obstacle to reach her goal. But she is not very devout. She will not pray to the Lord unless she has no choice. This afternoon, I made her come to my side to read some prayers, but soon she had enough of that and said, 'Mama, tell me about the life of Jesus Christ.' At first, I didn't want to talk. It tires me out. I always have a sore throat. But in the end, I made an effort and told her about the Lord's life. When I came to the Passion, she was in tears. I was pleased to see her so moved." Soon, something was to be revealed to Zelly regarding Leonie. Her aunt, Sister Marie Dosathy, was very ill, and it didn't sound like she would live much longer. Zelly went to visit her, and at the same time, gave her a message for her to deliver once she was in heaven. The message was this: "My dear mother, you played quite a trick on my sister when you sent her poor Leonie. That's not the kind of child she asked you for. You must sort that out." Leonie, too, sent a message along with her mother to her dying aunt. "My dear aunt, when you are in heaven, please ask God to give me the grace of conversion, and also to give me the vocation to be a true religious, because I think about it every day." One of her older sisters, Marie, wanted her to cross out the word true, as she felt that it didn't make any sense, but Leonie insisted that it stay that way. Marie asked her, "What does it mean to be a true religious?" Leonie answered, "It means that I want to be a very good religious and then a saint." Zelly was amazed and encouraged by this. She wrote to her sister-in-law, "What do you think of that? I must say I am amazed. Where in the world does she get these ideas? I certainly don't put them in her head. The poor child is so full of faults, I don't even know where to begin. But God is so merciful that I have always had hope and still do." On February 24th, 1877, Leonie's aunt died. Now Zelly confided mainly in Pauline, her oldest daughter. "Leonie is still a heavy cross to bear. Would that your aunt could obtain a change in the poor child." Leonie's miracle was coming. Because Zelly was so busy with her lace-making business and Louis Martin was often on business trips, Leonie was often alone with the maid. Unknown to the family, the maid targeted Leonie and told her to obey only her and not her parents. This meant that Leonie would either get in trouble with her mother or the maid. And so she chose to be obedient to the maid because she knew that even though her disobedience would make her mother upset with her, she wouldn't beat her, unlike the maid. This went on for quite a while until one day, Marie happened to walk in on them when the maid was threatening Leonie. Immediately, the maid was fired, although Zelly did give her a week to find a new place to live, but she didn't allow her to have any contact with Leonie. Zelly wrote immediately to her sister-in-law about it. "I think my sister has obtained a great grace for me. You know I had no influence over Leonie, that she eluded me. I tried everything, nothing worked. Unknown to me, she was fascinated by the maid, who made her very unhappy. It was Marie who discovered this and told me about it. I suffered a great deal by the child's behavior. I felt that my life was worthless, as I could be of no use to her. But since Saturday, everything has changed, and in such an unexpected way that I just can't get over it." Zelly went on in her letter that Leonie never wanted to leave Zelly's side. She was very obedient and affectionate, smothering her in constant kisses. Now that the obstacle of the maid was removed, Leonie still struggled but was no longer obstinate and angry. Now she tried hard to work on her faults. Zelly was dying of breast cancer, and she knew she didn't have much time left. She went to Lourdes to pray for a cure, saying, "If the Blessed Virgin doesn't cure me, I shall implore her to cure my child, to develop her mind and to make her a saint." Leonie was now very attached to her mother and prayed every day for a cure, even to die in her place if need be. One day she went to Marie and said, "I feel sick. God has answered my prayers. I'm going to die." Marie had laughed, but Leonie had been serious and burst into tears. But only 15 minutes later, Zelly writes, she had already forgotten about it and was asking for embroidered slippers. Before her death, Leonie's mother felt a lot of anxiety, especially about leaving Leonie. "If I were to be sorry to leave life, it would only be for Leonie's sake. Who will take care of her when I'm no longer here? A father, no matter how good he is, can never take my place. Who will love her like a mother?" Marie answered her mother spontaneously and generously, "I will, Mama. I promise you I will." On August 28, 1877, Zelly Martin died. Therese wrote in her autobiography years later, "Without a word, I touched my lips to my beloved mother's forehead." After Zelly's death, Louis Martin moved his family to the city of Lisieux. At first, she was very sad and lonely. She had a tendency to isolate herself, while Celine and Therese shared a room, and Marie and Pauline shared another room, which left Leonie on her own. With nobody to keep her company during the day, she often fell asleep. One afternoon, her mischievous sister secretly hung a notice in her room: "Those who don't come out to play doze off in the light of the day." In January of 1878, Leonie went to the boarding school run by the Benedictine nuns, and this time things went much better. In fact, Leonie's sisters began to see a change in her, so much that Marie mentioned it to her father in her letters, who had stayed behind to finish closing up the lace-making business. "Have you noticed, Papa, how quickly she has been changing lately? I am sure it is our darling mother who has won this grace for us, and I believe that one day our Leonie will make us very happy." Pauline had already entered the Carmelite convent in Lisieux, and now Marie was to enter it as well. So the family decided to take a short trip back to Helicon for one last visit for Marie to see friends and visit her mother's grave. Surprisingly to everyone, Leonie, who still could be very spontaneous and thoughtless, took advantage of the trip to enter the Poor Clare convent. Everyone was very hurt by her abrupt departure, as they hadn't had a chance to say goodbye. But her uncle, when he heard the news, predicted, "Don't worry, she won't last for long." And he was right. After 2 months with the Poor Clares, Leonie was forced to return home. Her health couldn't take the rigors of the rule. However, she was so depressed that she became sick over it. Some months later, Leonie tried again, but this time she went to the Visitation Convent in Caen. Therese, who was waiting for her own entrance into Carmel, wrote to her cousin, "I'm glad to see Leonie finally in her element. I think that there, and only there, she will be happy in the Visitation Convent. She will find all that she lacks in the world." However, Leonie lasted only 6 months, and in the winter of 1888, Leonie returned back home. Louis Martin, understanding her disappointment, welcomed her tenderly. She spent her time visiting the sick and doing housework. She watched her little sister Therese enter the convent, which must have caused some confusing emotions. However, she never became jealous of her sisters. She was always happy for them, even if she was sad for herself. Leonie spent the next 5 years at home with Celine and their father, who was declining mentally. Together, they helped take care of Louis Martin, who eventually had to be admitted into an asylum, much to everyone's grief. It was at this time, when Leonie was 30 years old, that she took a retreat at the Visitation Convent in Caen, the same convent that she had left years before, that she asked for permission to stay. Her uncle, who had taken over as head of the family, gave his permission, which surprised Celine. Celine wrote to her sisters Marie and Pauline, who were in the convent, "Oh, my dear sisters, if only you knew how my heart broke when I read Uncle's letter. I cried for a long time. My heart is very heavy. I kept thinking of Leonie, my companion in misfortune, who is abandoning me. Now I have nobody left in the world. There is nothing left all around me." Leonie was able to stay in the convent long enough to take her habit, but she suffered terribly, as the rule was very strict and Mother Superior was very hard on her. This Mother Superior was known to be hard on everyone, and many postulants left because of her inflexibility. On top of that, Leonie's childhood eczema, which had never fully gone away, would flare up at times, causing her to itch terribly under the coif that she had to wear both day and night. On July 20th, 1895, Leonie left the convent. She had tried the best she knew how, but struggled terribly with the structures and routines of the convent. The novice mistress had complained that if she took her eyes off of Leonie even for 1 minute, especially during praying the office, that Leonie would stop following along. This again was misunderstood, as Leonie was following along but became lost and confused by the prayers and lost her place. She said one day in her letters, "I want to please God, that is all, without racking my brains over it." But now she was home once again in utter defeat. Therese writes that when Leonie came to visit her sisters in the convent, she was crying so hard she couldn't even speak. Therese writes in a letter, "Finally, she met our eyes, and then all was well." Now it was Celine who was in the convent, who is now free to go now that Louis Martin had passed away a year earlier, and it was Leonie who was in the world. She went to live with her uncle and aunt and did her best to keep busy by learning new crochet patterns, helping in household duties. Throughout this pain, Leonie suffered, but she didn't suffer alone. In St. Therese's autobiography, Story of a Soul, we know that Therese and Celine were always playmates and best friends, but we hear nothing of Leonie. However, in the background, Therese kept close contact with Leonie, encouraging her and teaching her her little way. They wrote to each other constantly, and Leonie devoured Therese's advice and wisdom. However, it was evident that Therese too was very sick and that Leonie would lose her confidant soon. Leonie once wrote to Therese, "How are you? Dear little sister, you always tell me you are getting on well, or better, and I don't believe a word of it. When you write to me, tell me the exact truth, and tell me about God and about everything that can help me grow in virtue. These are the only things that make me truly happy. Dear sister, you will prevent me from repeating my old mistakes, won't you? I am so weak, you know how I rely on you. I beg of you, ask God very specially to deliver me from my scruples. I am always turning in on myself, and this hinders my attempts at perfection. You may be sure I am showing you my wounds as clearly as I can." We must also talk about the natural simplicity that Leonie had. One night, there was a terrible storm, so bad that her uncle and aunt were starting to panic. Everyone clutched at each other, and her aunt screamed, "This is the end!" All except for Leonie, that is, who was too busy eating her dinner to worry about the end. Her aunt wrote to Leonie's sister, "Leonie wasn't afraid in the least, and being hungry, she never missed a bite. Your uncle was in fits of laughter." As Therese's illness progressed and it seemed that the end was drawing near, Leonie hurried to the convent as often as she could to learn news from the lay sisters who met her at the door. It was on September 30th, 1897, when Leonie and her aunt and uncle were praying in the Carmelite chapel when a note was passed to them that Therese had died. Here we see Leonie's spirit and determination shine through rather than fade away. Determined to become a saint, she read Therese's manuscript, which had become published the following year. Unknown to Leonie at the time, she later learned that Therese had made the prophecy that Leonie would return to the Visitation after her death. She had said to Sister Marie of the Sacred Heart, "After my death, Leonie will enter the Visitation order, and this time she will succeed. She will take my name and that of St. Francis de Sales." And this is exactly what happened. On January 28, 1899, Leonie entered the Visitation Convent for good. Overcome with happiness, she wrote to her sisters, "When I entered, I was a bit nervous, but full of faith. The first words I said after throwing myself into my dear mother's arms were, 'When I leave here, it will be in my coffin.'" Leonie was no longer the little girl who screamed for her own way. Now she struggled within herself, trying to learn how to release her own will. Her sister Pauline encouraged her through her letters to not get discouraged over her weaknesses. "You know, my dear, while we live on this earth, we must expect to stumble and fall on our faces. If everything went well, we would tell ourselves, 'Ah, I am getting somewhere, I am attaining such and such a virtue.' But then we would become proud. Leonie, seek only one virtue, humility, which means we will never be surprised by our own weaknesses." Finally, on June 30th, 1899, Leonie was able to take the habit and receive her new religious name, St. Francis Therese, just as St. Therese had predicted. Leonie spent the rest of her years learning how to embrace her limitations and weaknesses. Always knowing how difficult she was as a child, she realized that she still had her faults and weaknesses that were irritating to others. Her slowness with her work, her lack of common sense, her need to have things in order. Either way, Leonie had many reminders about her problems. Thanks to Therese's encouragement and her book that Leonie read many times over and over, she learned how to practice self-abandonment and littleness. Always being rather touchy as a child, she now was known to be cheerful and exuberant. Often she would spontaneously throw her arms around a fellow nun, saying, "How I love this sister." Finally, Leonie found her happiness. She wrote to her sister, "I am perfectly happy as it is possible to be on this earth. When I look at my past and compare that time with this, I am overwhelmed with gratitude to the heart of Jesus, who has enveloped me in so much love and who has placed me in this loveliest vestibule of heaven where I shall live and die." Leonie had also developed a generous heart that was always ready to help others. She would often remind her companions, "Sister, ask me anything you would like. I am ready to help." She especially had a heart for the younger postulants, remembering her own rocky start to the religious life. She once noticed tears in the eyes of one of the newer postulants, and after the office, she waited by the door of the girl's cell to give her a big hug. Through the stubbornness and strong willpower that she struggled with as a little girl, Leonie had learned to overcome herself and become docile. She said, "I rely on obedience, which lets me work miracles, to the point that I hardly recognize myself. I love that virtue more than I can say, because it brings me, without fail, to humility, which is my favorite virtue." As Leonie aged, she became more and more holy and more little in the spiritual life. The next few quotes are from Leonie's letters to her sisters. However, she sounds so similar to St. Therese that it's difficult to discern one from the other. "I am so small that I cannot damn myself. Little children are not damned. I trust that I shall fall into the arms of Jesus, who is love and mercy. I have no fear of him. I've become so little that I have the audacity to believe that I shall not go to purgatory. I could not be more self-abandoned. I believe I have reached a point where God wishes me to be, for I love what he does above all else. I do not choose anything at all." Leonie and her sisters were called for the informative process for Therese's beatification. This was exhausting for the sisters, who were now all up in their age, as these sessions were very long and lengthy with a lot of questioning. Marie said ruefully to Leonie, "Let us work enthusiastically to become saints, and God will canonize us in heaven. On earth, it's too much trouble." It was announced that Therese would be canonized May 17, 1925. All 4 of Therese's sisters were invited to go, where they would have places of honor, but each sister decided to stay in the privacy of their own cloisters. Leonie, who had grown so small and humble, said, "I am happier here than in Rome. I prefer to be in my own lowly place." However, Leonie wasn't totally spared the recognition of being the sister of a saint. On the evening of the canonization, the community had a celebration giving Leonie the place of honor. With Therese's rising fame, visitors wanted to meet the sisters of the saint. However, Leonie longed to stay hidden and forgotten. One day, a priest who was passing through asked Leonie if he could see St. Therese's sister. Without batting an eye, she said, "We will ask our mother, but I don't think that would be possible." The priest answered, "Oh, that would be a great disappointment." To which Leonie replied, "I can assure you, Father, you won't be missing anything. It isn't worth the trouble." The priest left, shocked and scandalized. He happened to run into the chaplain, where he repeated what had just happened. The chaplain burst out laughing. "My poor father, you have been tricked. You were speaking to Leonie herself." Over the last years of Leonie's life, she battled many health problems, including an operation on her knee. She contracted many illnesses and colds, including bronchitis and pneumonia. Her eczema continued to be a problem, sometimes covering her from head to foot. On the morning of Corpus Christi, 1941, Leonie rose from her bed as usual, but suffered a stroke and fell at the foot of her bed. She lost the power of speech, but was able to smile and point for the things she needed or wanted. She lasted like this for 5 days, and finally, she died on June 17, 1941, after giving her mother Prioress a gentle and humble smile. Soon, word that St. Therese's sister died spread throughout the city, and thousands of people stopped by to see her body laid out in the open coffin. She was mentioned on the radio and newspapers, and many people flocked to her grave to lay flowers and ask for her intercession. Leonie's difficult life was not in vain. We now have a saint to confide our worries, for those especially who suffer from mental, emotional, and learning problems. Although Therese will always overshadow her, we know that Leonie wouldn't have it any other way. How happy Zélie must be to know that her words that once pained her would become words of hope to so many. She has a will of iron. When she wants something, she will fight her way past any obstacle to reach her goal. In 2015, Leonie Martin was declared Servant of God. Let us pray for the next step in her canonization to be declared venerable. Servant of God Leonie Martin, pray for us.